welcome to We're So Bloody Early. My name is Jake. I'm 33 years old. I'm a husband and a recent dad. This show is going to be a focus on Bitcoin and how our journeys to this amazing new asset class has affected our lives. I personally have been lucky to work as a broker through my life, an investor, and a couple of failed startups behind me. I'm very excited to start this new project. And these are my two great co-hosts, Matty and Jigs.
Hi guys, I'm Matt. I'm a 35-year-old father and husband, massive lover of sport. I'm an aerospace engineer come entrepreneur. I've been running my own engineering consultancy now for 5 years. I have a diverse range of skills across multiple industry sectors, and that's now led me to my new love, Bitcoin.
And I'm Jigs, 41 years of age, husband, father of three. Worked in the cash and transit industry for 20 years in a labor-intensive job. Recently retired for about a year now. I'm a stay-home dad and a hybrid trader.
Together, we're the co-hosts of the We're So Bloody Early show. In the future, you'll expect to hear from some special guests that we get along to talk through their experiences. Hopefully, we'll be creating some educational content that brings our friends and family along on this journey as well. And we hope you enjoy. Always reach out if you have any questions whatsoever. Thank you very much. Jigsy, I'd just like to turn to yourself for a second. So when you finished up school, did you choose to go to university? Did you take a technical degree, or what was your path through that next kind of phase of life?
Yeah, so like I said, wasn't interested on academics. I was academically challenged. Sport was my go-to. Finished school, bankrupt at 19. I had almost everyone had led me to believe I couldn't be more than what I was, or have more than what I had, and that I was this black duck, and that's all I'd ever be. And it's more my fault than theirs, because I believed it and I put up those barriers and just accepted it. And I was also too scared to try anything out of fear of failure, like Matty said, and prove my doubters right. So one thing I didn't fear of failing was on a rugby field. I was okay at rugby, played first grade from a young age, representative football, made Australian schools, Div 2. I felt when I was on a field, I felt in complete control of my decisions. I knew the risk and rewards of everything I did on the field, but I only ever felt that on the field. I never ever felt that off in everyday life. I truly believe that I was sent here by God or someone to be an example to people around me, to say, hey, look at that guy. He's a fuck up. Don't do what he's doing. I honestly believe that for my first 30 years of my life. Fortunately, and the reason I'm highlighting these points is because I want my story of my journey to elevate those around me, because it doesn't have to be like that forever. You have the power to change that, like I did. I mean, I didn't think I could, but I'm proof that I could. That black duck has now turned into a swan, I believe. But yeah, so coming out of school, my parents left here. So we immigrated here in 1996. My whole family, I'm the eldest of five. They all left in 2001 and immigrated to America through that GFC, just prior to the GFC, sorry. So my dad got offered a job from the company here in Australia to move to America. They all left. They wanted to take me. I was now 21 years old, and it was bad enough moving to a state without rugby. I didn't want to move to a country without it. So I stayed, which was massive. I mean, that must have been so hard for my parents, their eldest leaving behind in a country that they had searched the globe as the safest place to move out of Africa. And then for me to say, I'm not going. And then I became very lost again, and I just gravitated to that structure and boarding school environment, and I joined the Air Force just because I craved discipline and structure, because I was becoming very lost. And then when I came out of the Air Force, I just signed up to a company that was a cash management company, like armored cash services, and was basically there for 20 years. So I've got to see what cash does in the world and money. But fortunately, in 2019, when I was learning about Bitcoin, is when I got to see that the world was changing and cash was old news. And
I love this part of the story. Sorry, because
I could
had
see
to confess I've heard Jigs' story before, and it just you were the guy that was literally physically moving cash around Melbourne, for a company that moved it around the world, and as a result, you understood like how that system works very deeply. And you told me the story about you and your mate in your security van driving around listening to crypto podcasts, and that's how it all started.
Well, it's funny because the guy I used to work with day in, day out, for good 6-8 years, he used to listen to a lot of conspiracy stuff and things like that, and I just used to and he's like, I'm 41, he's 60 years old, he's 20 years older than me, right? And he used to listen to this stuff, and I just used to think, you're an idiot, like, why are you listening to this rubbish? And then Bitcoin would pop up in there in his YouTube that he would listen to through his phone, and I'd be like, oh, that's a scam, but it just kept rearing its head, and like the honey badger, and I thought, you know what, I better start paying attention to this. I could see on the front lines that cash was just diminishing. Everything was like, Australia was ranked 6th in the world in PayWave. It was all going that way. And I recognized that I can't stay in this industry. I've been in it 20 years. I can't be in it for another 20 years because it won't be here. So I had my back up against the wall. Pandemic came in, and at this stage, I'd been married for 4 years or 5 years. I've got 2 kids, and all of a sudden, I've got to think about them and future. Before kids, we're very selfish. We just think about ourselves. I used to live day to day, paycheck to paycheck, and I couldn't care less what was ahead of me. But when you have kids, and you need to start thinking ahead. So I started paying attention to this Bitcoin stuff. So this is a good story of a deadbeat doing deadbeat things. Well, when I was a deadbeat, I went and did the number one thing you're not supposed to do. I went and took a 10 grand loan. So for the early half of 2019, I listened to all this stuff, and I started following a guy who was teaching how to read charts and how to basically, it's math. Like, math doesn't lie. Men lie, women lie, math doesn't lie. 1 + 1 does equal 2. And this guy was saying things and saying, if this happens, blah, blah, blah. And I'd go, okay, well, let's just follow him for 6 months and see if all the things he's saying start happening. And they were happening week in, week out. And he wasn't saying things based on emotion or what he wanted him to pump up or anything. He was just saying what he saw on a screen based on market sentiment and all that stuff. So after 6 months, I went and took a 10 grand loan. I tried to do it myself and jump on forums and gamble. I mean, Australia is a big gambling community. So I fell into that and tried to gamble it away, and jump on this token and this, and jump in here and jump out there. And that was just the worst thing I could do. And I dwindled this 10 grand down to like 4. And then I thought, nah, I've got to go back to this guy, Stephen Courtney. He had a channel called the Crypto Crew University. I've got to, I kept hearing him say, and people saying, the best thing to do, the best investment you can make is invest in yourself, by far. It's better than but investing in Google or Facebook or whatever, is to invest in yourself. So I contacted him and I said, listen, I want to do I think it was not the beginner course, it was the intermediate. I said, I want to do the intermediate. And he goes, look, you should buy the whole intermediate, advanced and professional. And I'm like, well, I don't want to spend all my money, so I'll just get the intermediate. So I got it. And I was a terrible, terrible learner, terrible. Thankfully, the Air Force, they recognized that the way that I retained information was through hearing it. No one had ever figured this out. So I'd failed all through high school, trying to stare in a book, and it didn't go in. But people in the Air Force figured out that if I talk to someone or watch something, YouTube has been phenomenal for me, and podcasts and audiobooks. So I did the intermediate course and went, whoa, this is next level. Like, now I'm learning something that I've never heard anyone speak of. So I contacted him again. I said, listen, I think I've made a mistake. I think I need to purchase the advanced and the professional. So he said, sure, we'll do it as a package. I'll discount you, and away we go. So I did that, and basically taught me how to fish. So
what were you fishing, Jigsy? What were you fishing?
Well,
how did he teach you to fish?
Well, he taught me how to read charts and how to, because humans are terrible investors. We have emotions, and that's what makes us terrible investors. Fortunately, through all this, being a rugby player, and then I retired young. So we'll just take a step back quick. Was fortunate enough to meet the love of my life young, marry her young. She was very attractive, and I got comfortable with life and thought, well, I've got the pretty girl, and started to put on a lot of weight. So I went from like 75 kilos to 96 kilos. And someone took a photo of me at my 31st birthday. And I said to my wife, I said, who is this guy? Like, how did you let me get like this? And she said, look, you've just always been the rugby guy. So, and I said, nah, that's not good enough. I said, I need to get healthy and fit. So I said to her, look, I'm going to go run this ultra marathon in South Africa. And she said, what's the furthest you've run? And I said, 3Ks. And she goes, how far is this ultra? And I said, it's 90. And she goes, well, how are you going to do that? And I said, in South Africa, we say, ek boer maak 'n plan. And I'll make a plan. And so, yeah, I just ran trained for this ultra in a year. Everyone said it was impossible to do. And anyway, I finished it in 11 hours. And I found a new lease on life, that it's 70% mental, ultra running, or any long distance running. And I found a new lease on life where I could do something that everyone was telling me was impossible to do. And that was the game changer for me. So when fast forward these years, I meet Steve, do these courses, and I'm doing something that I thought I couldn't do. But thankfully for the running lesson, I was learning something. So I took these lessons that I'd learned, and I had $1,000 left after spending $3,000 on these courses, and the emotion was still there as an investor, as a human being, as a male. There's an ego as well, which we suffer with. So I took what I'd learned from him. I took that grand, I turned it into 4. I took that 4, turned it into 8, and then I'm like, okay, let's start being silly here, and let's start using what I've been taught with position sizing and all that good gear. And slowly grew it and grew it and grew it. And had I not learned that lesson from running, and brought it into investing, of being patient and working towards something, and nothing is unachievable if you put your mind to it. But I think the biggest thing that Steve has taught me, and I found this through running as well, is I train with a female. And the reason I trained back then with a female was because females don't have an ego like guys. And we get caught up and try to be a bit bravado and do things to impress. Whereas females don't do that. When they're running, they have a set strategy. And I've used that in my investing, in my trading. And I'm not a trader. I'm a in between a swing trader and a long-term investor. So I'm a hybrid trader or a hybrid investor. But that has taught me a lot through running and then through investing in Bitcoin and that. Yeah. So sorry, I was just rambling a bit.
No, that's great, mate. No, thank you so much for sharing all of that, because it's something I personally find so interesting is people's personal journeys to the kind of light bulb moment of like, oh, this fucking makes a lot of fucking sense, is totally varied. And that's one of the reasons why we're obviously having this conversation now, to talk through it all. Matty, do you have any questions from Jigsy for that process, or
Jigs,
thoughts?
There was one thing there, Jigs, that you mentioned that I think is paramount to a lot of facets of life, but the word patience. Being patient is something that requires discipline. Unfortunately, in Australian culture, you also touched on that gambling is a huge issue. It's an unspoken issue.
Well, when I was growing up, we didn't do it in South Africa. So coming here, and it was like such a norm thing to do. I mean, I remember meeting some Canadians and Americans, and they couldn't believe that you can just come here and you can bet on politics if you want.
Oh, you can bet on the weather. I mean, it's the culture, the Australian culture, especially in that gambling phase. It's an important subject in terms of perception of Bitcoin as well. A lot of people, as you said, sort of growing up and listening to how you first viewed your trading. You mentioned that it was akin to gambling, where you just went into these forums and thought you could do it yourself, but you learned through your Air Force, you learned through your training that you required structure and patience. I mean, that to me is a really key element in this entire story moving forward as well. It's very important.
Yeah. So when you say discipline, the strategy is what keeps the discipline in check and the emotions in check. So if you can learn a strategy, a sound strategy, I mean, the easiest strategy for anyone new in here is just HODL. Is just literally do your research on Bitcoin, why it's important for humanity, and invest in it and just hold. That's the easiest strategy. But if you wanted to elevate that, there's ways to do it, and we'll talk that through this series of different ways to do it.
Well, on that point, I might just jump in and talk about that whole process of getting to the phase of saying just HODL. So for me, so post uni, to pick up the story again. So, dad had died, we'd sold his house. I finished business school. I went to work as a ship broker. So I was the middleman between cargoes and ships. This job took me to Singapore. I spent 5 years in the industry and 4 years and a bit in Asia. The job was everything I wanted it to be in terms of like, it was a strong test, very fast-paced environment, lots of exposure to people and relationship building, but at the same time as understanding how a contract was created and learning how to trade freight, basically. I met a friend who was there at the time, Dan Burke. Give a shout out to him. He now works for BitGo, and Dan at the time, it was 2015. And he said, we're having some beers at one point, and I was always frustrated in that my job wasn't creative enough. I was interested in the technology space, the startup space, and looking at innovation and thinking, wow, this is awesome. I'm the middleman between a coal mine and a ship. This is fucking backwards. Like, the future of coal is very, very poor in terms of its, dirty emissions, and also just the fact you can now build a solar panel and put it on someone's roof. You just don't even need a power grid any longer. And the energy market is obviously a big part of Bitcoin. We'll get to that later. But so yeah, Dan was like, have a look at Bitcoin. And I bought some 2015. And that was in December. I went back home. I banged on about it to a few friends. And this whole idea of like, a blockchain that word was just completely new. Everyone's like, what the fuck is a blockchain? And what that Bitcoin, you're not actually, you bought Bitcoin. What the wood ass, piss off, mate. This is this is stupid. And so
this is not a stupid story. I've heard this story. This is a brilliant story. This is probably the highlight of the series.
No, it's funny, but everyone's journey is different. But so I bought these Bitcoins, and by 2016 September, they gone up in value, and I sold some, and I took my now wife to Japan on holiday, and then we decided to
Met Satoshi there as well.
Sorry, met Satoshi, yeah. Bumped into Matty with his t-shirt in the Golden Guys, yeah. And so went to Japan, and then 2017 came around, and I decided to resign from that job, and Loz and I went traveling, and I sold some Bitcoin, and I traveled around South America on some Bitcoin profits. And all along I'm thinking, this is great, making money from nothing. Who's going to get in the way? And then there was a period of time in Bitcoin's development that involved the creation of Bitcoin Cash, and also then the second hard fork as well, which was the hard fork, and then Bitcoin SV as well was created. And these are offshoots of the original Bitcoin, basically, and ideological discrepancies or disagreements between people within the Bitcoin ecosystem. But the news was potentially very negative, and I thought, oh fuck it, I don't want to run away from the few $1,000 I'd made out of this, so I'm just going to sell most of it and keep the cash. The hard fork happened, and I was given some Bitcoin Cash, and as part of that process I wanted to sell the Bitcoin Cash, and I'd been on eBay, and I found an advert for a 1980s Mercedes SL that said, "Will sell for crypto." And I went up to North London, and I bought a classic car in a car park off a rapper called Black the Ripper, using my phone. And the whole process would have been easier with cash. Like seriously, you could have turned up with £6,000 in cash, given it to him, and left. We tried to do it with crypto, so we sent like 0.0000 something of Bitcoin Cash to his wallet, and the blockchain was very slow, and it took 40 minutes or something. And he was like, "Oh, I've got it." Meantime, he's like honking on these spliffs next to this car, and I eventually sent him all this Bitcoin Cash, got this car, got it home. It broke down, it leaked. It was a total disaster. The point of telling this whole story being, I was very lucky to buy some Bitcoin in 2015. I saw it go up in the 2017 bull market. I took some profits. I sold because I thought the whole thing was just going to die when the hard fork happened. And I even bought a classic car with some Bitcoin.
So funny. Future money for old classic vehicles.
Yeah, so I exchanged exactly. I think it was 7 Bitcoin Cash or something. It's about $6,000 worth that today would be worth God knows what. That I exchanged for a 40-year-old car that fell apart. I mean, retarded. In terms of what we now know. But
what was it? How much did you pay?
I think I paid £6,000 for this car.
No.
And I sold it 2 months later.
No, but do you know how much Bitcoin Cash you did?
Oh, I wouldn't know what the actual unit price was, but it was so it would have been January 2018's equivalent Bitcoin Cash price of 6,000 in Bitcoin Cash units that I exchanged for the car.
But you don't know how many units you.
No, but we could look at the historical price and find out. I don't know what it is off the top of my head.
Okay.
So meantime, I'd quit my shipbroking job, and Loz and I had moved to London, and I was then in the startup space and working on a number of projects. And yeah, Bitcoin was just something I was looking at on the side. Got quite interested in blockchain. I put some money into an ICO, and they disappeared. And I bought a whole bunch of other bits and pieces, and didn't really know what they were. And some of them made money, and some of them didn't. And some of them were, related to renewable energy or related to, some sales pitch, basically. And so to kind of echo some of both of your points, the period of time that builds up to today has got lots of different touch points at it that, I thought it was a scam, but I was making money on it, so I didn't care. And then I thought the whole scam would die, so I just took my money out. Or I bought literally a car that should have been on the scrap heap in exchange for this stuff. And it's very interesting how everyone's got this slightly different journey. I can't quite remember where I was going with all of this, to be honest, but the period of time basically from business school through to the end of my 20s and 30s included actually ownership of a bit of Bitcoin, and my business career kind of touched in and out of it. But It's only now in the last 12 months where I've really understood what Bitcoin actually is. And it's through those experiences that I'm able to see that. And so that, I guess, kind of brings us all up to where we're at today. And a lot of my
so like how's it affecting us now? Like your thought process now, like my thought process now of Bitcoin and money and what is money is so different to what it was 2 years ago. Like unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Well, sorry, I'll jump in there quickly and just to kind of continue this story. Sorry, Matty, we'll come to you in a second.
Of course, no stress.
So when Dad died when I was 20, we sold our family home. I got some money. And so as a 23-year-old, I went to London looking for a wealth management service. And these are companies that sell wealth management. They take a 1% fee, regardless of the performance of the portfolio. They are a regulated service, so they can get you access into asset classes that a retail investor can't necessarily get into. But apart from anything, you're buying peace of mind when you're sitting there and you're super young, you don't have any life experience, you don't have a profession, you don't know what to do with this money. And so I basically outsourced the responsibility of my own wealth preservation strategy to someone else. And I invested in a number of different asset classes. So that Bitcoin investment in 2015 was just one thing that I tried, but I had a wealth management strategy with basically someone who was putting your money into debt, into equities, into currencies, into commodities and other types of funds. And I then bought a property in London, which I leveraged with a mortgage, did a renovation job, so got some exposure to the physical property market. And there were a couple of other smaller projects. But what I've learned through that process is someone, a mate of mine described it like this recently when I was telling him this story. It's like, Jake, they saw you coming. And I'm describing like professionals, lawyers, mortgage brokers, estate agents, wealth managers. They make money from their fees. They don't make money from the performance of your asset over a period of time.
Yeah.
This is a crucial point for anyone out there who is trying to preserve their wealth for the future. It wasn't, or it's seen as the norm because that's how the system currently functions, but it doesn't have to be when you utilize what Bitcoin is today. And through that, I guess I now see what it is as an opportunity, in that you can buy something that's digitally native, doesn't have a management fee, doesn't have any kind of OPEX risk. So like a house, the tenants might move out, or the shower might leak, and that ruins all of your net margin. Highly illiquid, very difficult to sell. Or a wealth manager that, like, your portfolio might be losing purchasing power on an annual basis, but they'll tell you that their report at the end of the year is like, oh, we've made you 9% this year, we're so amazing, and look at all the other funds that have performed worse than us. But that 9% could be 11% less than what the purchasing power change has done. And that's what you have to understand about inflation and how the money supply is changing things. So I'll stop banging on at that point, but there is so much you learn through that period to get to now. Sorry, Matty, I cut you off. You were going to make a comment or two.
No, I mean the technical explanation of the technical financial explanation that you've just gone through certainly is quite informative. But there was one word that you used for the simpletons such as myself at times, and that's the word scam. Here we are right now with three of us that all have gone on different journeys, have all dabbled in different investments, and have all come across done their own research, which is probably very important to touch on. Do your own research, people. But the word scam resonates with me because from a boomer generation, doing exactly what you just said, Jakey, with going to a financial advisor, and please, people, this is not financial advice, but do what you need to.
Read the small print.
Yeah, read the small print, right? Let's just get that out of the way. But I myself have recently had conversations with people that advise me, and I blatantly said to my accountant recently, this is recently, say 4 months ago, I said, oh, what's your thoughts on investing in crypto? He goes, Matt, you're an effing idiot. It's an absolute scam. No joke. That's what he said to me. I then met Jigs, and he gave me some great content, and I'm sure we'll relay that to the listeners a little later. So Matt, just start with this. Do your own research. Start with this. Some great content, and it wasn't even about Bitcoin. It had nothing to do with Bitcoin. It was about a little bit what you touched on before, both of you, and that's sort of the financial system, understanding when it contracts, where we are today in someone's opinion. So I presented that back to my accountant. And so here you are, someone that's grown up, fully educated in a financial background, old, I want to call it old money, old ways, old methods, who has told his client that he's basically an effing idiot. I've got a great relationship with him, mind you. In the space of an hour of listening, he's come back to me with this proverbial between his legs and said, sorry, Matt, I was wrong. And
he's a good listener.
He's a good listener. So the important part to this is people have to be ready to listen. I said this earlier. So in life, you have to be ready to listen. And I'm hoping that those that listen to us realize that this is an opportunity to help them understand if they're willing to do their own research by listening. And that may do what it's done for me and yourself, Jake, and for Jigs. And we all have touched on the word scam. Jigs was in the with his work colleague thinking, what is this banana listening to? Jake was there with some mates saying, you're a banana, what are you doing? Investing in Bitcoin. I was the same thing, thinking Bitcoin, can I bet on that at a casino? There's at some point we've all thought that this thing's a bloody scam. And it, unfortunately, in my opinion, it has almost been beaten into us that way from traditionalists. And it's not been until recently for myself through doing my own research that this is no scam.